Hello, my name's Lana Grant and I'm here to talk to you about my experiences of pregnancy and motherhood as a woman on the autistic spectrum. So I received my diagnosis of Asperger syndrome, which we don't use anymore. So I identify as being on the autistic spectrum. When I was 38, a late diagnosis, and it kind of followed years of being diagnosed with various mental health conditions that seemed to get bigger or worse, I guess, during my pregnancies. I mean, I had difficulties as a child and as a teenager, but as a pregnant woman, I came into contact with the medical professional much more regularly. They didn't diagnose me. They didn't, we're talking a long time ago. So, it's only been in the recent years we know that autism in females has become more, people have become more aware of the different presentations as well. So obviously I didn't get a diagnosis. However, when I went for my assessment when I was 38, it was quite apparent that my childhood indicated that I'd had these issues from being a child. I didn't speak until I was 5, unless it was to my parents, close family. So I was the classic quiet, shy child. So before my diagnosis, I'd already had 5 children. They were a special interest, I think. So when I found out that I was pregnant with my 6th child, I kind of headed off to the internet in search of support. I wanted to find women like myself that had maybe been through pregnancy and experienced it and parenthood and experienced it maybe in the way that I had. Because to me, it found that if I listened to neurotypical women and their experiences of birth and parenthood, they seemed radically different to mine, and I couldn't quite, I wasn't quite on the same page as them, if you like. So every time I typed in pregnancy and autism, I would get information to issues that pregnancy could cause, certain issues in can we cut that bit there? So I searched the internet and found that the most information I got when I typed in autism and pregnancy was what not to eat, what not to do, how to prevent having an autistic child. As a fairly newly diagnosed autistic adult, I found that quite offensive. Not what I was looking for at all. But I couldn't find any other women like me who were talking about the things that I was interested in with regards to their experiences of pregnancy, and any support maybe on how I could make my 6th pregnancy and birth less traumatic, I guess. I mean, I know birth is traumatic for lots of people, but for me, I felt, and you're probably sitting there thinking, so why do it so many times? Part of the issue that I have is that I'm a perfectionist. This is probably about my 26th recording of this talk, and I'm still not happy. But I desperately love my children. I loved having my children. I loved the individuality of them. I loved being a mom. It gave me my identity, I think. And I just loved every single thing about having babies and children, which was strange because when I was younger growing up, I never really wanted any children. I didn't particularly have anything against children. I'm an only child, so I didn't have that much experience, or I wasn't around children very much. So yeah, so I always felt that I enjoyed having my children. That was my purpose, that was what I did. And even now, you know, in my job, I work with children, probably because I'm still a bit childish myself. I love my job. I love working with kids and their families. You know, that to me is, yeah, it just makes me really happy. So I decided that, you know, I'd have my 6th baby. And after I'd had this baby, I would try and do something to maybe get a group of mums together, get awareness out there, because I felt quite passionately that there might be an appetite for that from other people if there was from me. So in 2017, I finally had a book published, From Here to Maternity, which I have a copy of it here. So I had my book published, and on the back of that found that I was getting lots of contact from other women who identified with some of the issues potentially that I'd written about in the book, and developed a really close group of friends, who I'm still in touch with. We talk regularly. We don't necessarily meet up in person, but we do. We communicate online, and we get each other. You know, we get straight to the point with the things we're talking about. So anyway, I'm digressing. So the book came out, and then lots of people started to contact me and say, yeah, I felt that as well, and we all kind of realised that actually we felt as though the midwifery staff, the hospital staff didn't quite get our different experiences. And I think part of that was because on the whole, we looked normal. Normal, I mean, what is that? But anyway, so we looked normal. We didn't have any obvious, if you like, disability that they could talk to us about, or make any kind of adjustments for. So we kind of found that it was good to start talking about that. And, you know, I think for lots of women who are considering pregnancy, who are on the autistic spectrum, diagnosed or self-identifying, there are things that you can do. You know, there are people that you can talk to about those different presentations, or you know, I think for me the overwhelming thing was the sensory side. I didn't realise that a lot of the things I experienced during my pregnancies were down to kind of sensory overstimulation and sensory needs. I just didn't. And now that I do, I can kind of see where those might have arisen. So I'm very hypersensitive to what goes on in my body. So I knew with all of my children, really, I knew kind of very, very early on that I was pregnant. I just felt that change. So I was never really surprised when the pregnancy test was positive, because I almost had that, particularly as I had more children. Those feelings, I would identify them kind of quite quickly. Some of the issues that I really struggled with was the idea of morning sickness. My mum had instilled into me as a young child that she'd been really sick, vomit sick, when she was pregnant with me. And I have a phobia of sickness and vomiting, so that, I guess, maybe that put me off having children. So when I was pregnant, what I wasn't prepared for, I was expecting to vomit, I didn't, but what I wasn't prepared for was the overwhelming sickness, the feeling of nausea all day. You know, morning sickness, that's meant to be in the morning, literally. And it wasn't, and that was really quite hard to kind of manage, because it could be anything that set me off. I'd wake up in the morning, I felt nauseous, so I didn't want to eat anything. The more I didn't eat anything, the more nauseous I felt. So it was this vicious cycle. So yeah, so that was quite tricky. And you know, I think the exhaustion was magnificent, not in a good way. It was just so overwhelming. And I think now, you know, I've realised actually that you know, the more work I've done in autism, that autistic people struggle with that social exhaustion, those overwhelming feelings of exhaustion. So if I have to go to a meeting and be social and put my mask on, then it wipes me out for a good 48 hours because it's too much. So being pregnant, having all those changes going on in my body was hard as well. So yeah, so I guess that first kind of, if you like, trimester, those first 3 months were hard, because as well, I didn't tell people, because you know, you don't. And you know, I think the issue around miscarriage is probably not something that people talk about, but I did have a miscarriage in amongst my pregnancies. So I didn't really tell anyone. So you can't really explain why you're so tired and why you don't want to eat anything, or you feel a bit queasy, and people start to guess, I suppose. So that was, yeah, that was hard. I mean, then, you know, you get to kind of the second trimester and it's a case of, oh wow, you know, that's the good time. That's when you kind of, you know, you feel better because the sickness is supposed to have kind of alleviated. I mean, for me, it did still come back occasionally. So it should alleviate, and you're not too big, you know, baby's not too big for you to kind of feel quite cumbersome and clumsy. So yeah, that was probably a slightly, you know, that's a better, I think, a better time. But round about, you know, kind of 20 weeks when you might be going off for your first scan or something, it opens you up to a whole world of having to speak to people. So I don't like hospitals, ironically. I particularly don't like having to go and be examined. I don't like the smell of hospitals. I don't like the sounds, the lights, the whole thing. Because my first pregnancy was quite complicated, I was then placed under consultant care for all of my other children, which meant I had to go to hospital, basically. So when I went to hospital, it was difficult because, you know, you're kind of trying to get across to medical professionals how you feel. And I think the NHS is a massive machine itself, and I think you go into clinics and things, and they're doing what they do, and they see lots of people. And obviously for my first 5 children, I didn't know that I was autistic, so I couldn't really explain how I felt. And then when I had my 6th child, you know, my first booking in appointment, I went in and I just said, you know, I'm having a cesarean section. Now that was my choice. I'd done it the other way 4 times, but with my 5th child, I had to have an emergency cesarean section. And I felt very much that for my final pregnancy, that's what I wanted. I wanted to be in control. I wanted to know when I was going to have my baby. I wanted to, you know, not have to go through that trauma and anxiety, I guess, of not feeling as though I was listened to, as I had been with my other children. So yeah, so I you know, I had to fight, and I had to kind of say, look, this is why, and explain why. But I was told that I could have a planned, an elective caesarean section. And that was fine, because out of all of my pregnancies and births, for me, that final one was the best. It was, it was for me, I knew what was happening. I knew when it was happening. There was no kind of anxiety around, well, my due date's passed, when am I going to have this baby? Because I knew when it was going to happen. I think my issue probably was around the understanding after I'd had my baby that I'd asked to be in a room on my own, because what I'd found with my previous pregnancies, which I knew was down to my autism, was that if I was in a ward, a 4-bed ward with other women, people want to talk, don't they? They want to come in, they want to say, hi, how are you? And I just couldn't do that, not after having gone through labour and birth. I just didn't want that communication. I kind of shut down, I guess. So I'd often kind of, with my other children, I would sit with the curtains around the cubicle, and then the staff would come in and open them. Oh, why are you shut away? And obviously at that time I couldn't say, I couldn't advocate for myself and say because I want them shut, and I didn't have my diagnosis. So I just thought I was being a bit weird and antisocial. But I know that actually having been in hospital and being on those 4-bed wards was really, it was really hard. It was really stressful. And I just didn't want to go through that again with my 6th child. So I was given a room on my own. That was great. But then in the evening, so I had him on the morning, and then in the evening one of the midwives came in and said, oh, we're moving you to a ward. And I didn't really know what to say. And you know, my mum was there, my husband was there, and they said, oh, why? And they said, oh, we've got a lady who needs a room. And I couldn't say anything because I just lost that ability to verbalise at that moment. So they left the room, midwives left the room, and I just started to cry. I got a cannula in. I started to try and get the cannula out, and I said, I'm going home. I'm not going into a ward. I can't. And I was in full meltdown mode. You know, my husband was saying, oh, you know, just do it for tonight. And I was saying, you don't understand. I can't do it. And actually it was my mum that went out and said, you need to come in and talk to her. She's really upset, which they did. And I said, look, you know, I need to be in a room on my own. I'm autistic. I can't be in a room with other women, with their babies, the sensory overload. And they said, oh yeah, we saw that you're autistic in your notes. And that was it, you know. I was made to feel as though I was just making a fuss. It was like, well, we've got a very poorly lady who needs a room on her own. And I said, well, that's fine, I'll go home then. Anyway, they managed to find me a room. And again, even then, I just felt a little bit let down because I got my diagnosis. They knew, clearly didn't know enough about autism. But anyway, that was probably the one issue that I had in my kind of care after my diagnosis. And then, you know, it opens you up, doesn't it? When you think about giving birth, you know, it's a messy business, giving birth. And it's thinking about all those, you know, those things that come with it. Do you know, with whether it was a normal vaginal delivery or whether it was a caesarean section, you know, there are those questions that need to be answered. Do you want the baby to be given to you straight away? Do you want to do skin to skin? Those are lots of sensory things to take on board. I guess first 5 times, that was not something, I just did what everybody else kind of suggested. But yeah, with my final child, I was very much, I'd done my birth plan, obviously being aware that, you know, things, you hope things go the way that you want them to. So I'd done my birth plan, and it pretty much went to plan. I wanted him cleaned, and then given to me for skin to skin, and that was fine, and that was all done. Because I think it is about those sensory issues that you know, maybe people aren't as familiar. You know, look, I think now maybe people are more familiar around, you know, women being autistic, and they are going to encounter pregnant women who are autistic, but I still think that maybe the sensory issues are not necessarily quite as understood as they could be. And then, you know, there's motherhood, and motherhood opens you up to a whole new set of challenges as an autistic woman. Yeah, it's great until you feel that you've got to start going to toddler groups, baby groups, new mum and baby groups. Yeah, I found those really hard. Mum at the school gates, I used to kind of think, well, do I go up and talk to that group? Because there's always a group. There's always a group talking, and I didn't know how to access that. I didn't know, do I go up to them? How do I get involved in that conversation? Do I want to get involved in that conversation, actually? Because I wasn't always sure that I did. And then, as obviously the more children I had in school, and certainly with my last child, I'd just end up standing kind of on the side, not quite knowing how to make those communicative attempts and how to do the social interaction. And also thinking, I'm not sure that I want to. And some days I just didn't even want to. I just wanted to kind of get up to school, pick my child or children up and go home. The other issue that I used to have as well was my children were under strict instructions not to come up to me at the end of the school day and ask for a friend to come home that day. Couldn't cope with that. Far too stressful. But of course, I didn't have a diagnosis then, so I didn't know why I was like that. So you get all these feelings of guilt that you're a bad mom because somebody else's mom might say, oh yeah, you can all come, but I just couldn't. The thought of that being out of my routine and not what I'd expected, I found really hard. So yeah, so my kids were, you know, I mean, they tried it occasionally, but yeah, they were under strict instructions to try not to do that, because I used to say, well, you know, we've got plans and I won't have anything for dinner, and then it was, so we would just plan those things. I think getting older, becoming older and becoming more comfortable in my own skin, you know, and I always used to say that some days I just wake up and I feel uncomfortable in my skin, and I know things might be a bit tricky that day, but certainly as I've got older, those days have become less. I think that's probably being in an environment that supports me. So the job that I do is it's very flexible. My youngest child is at specialist provision. He's autistic. He's at a specialist provision. So we don't do the moms on the gate thing. Yes. We don't do that. I have met the moms at his school. You know, there's been a meeting at school. I'm sure they won't mind me saying, they probably won't, you know, they wouldn't mind me saying that they all feel that they're on the spectrum as well. That's probably why we all get on. And I think it is about, when I look back, you know, I had my first child at 20 and I had my last child at 41. So that's kind of 21 years of on off being pregnant, but certainly, you know, that 32, my eldest son's 32, so 32 years of being a mom. And would I change it? No. Would I have liked an earlier diagnosis? Absolutely. Because if I'd had an earlier diagnosis, it might well have meant, well, it would have meant that I would have been able to understand the things that I could do, and also not beat myself up for the things that I found difficult. And that would have been, I guess, better for me. Which is why I kind of advocate a lot for children I work with and my own children to have had their diagnoses, because to me that's really important that we understand ourselves. But yeah, being a mom has been, it's been a joy, it's been a pleasure. It is a joy, it is a pleasure, because yeah, I'm still a mom. And I think having my diagnosis might have made me a better mom, because I kind of I stopped stressing. I stopped stressing about being perfect and getting everything right with regards to my kids. I listen to them a lot more, I think, because they've got a lot of sensible stuff to say. So yeah, would I change it? No. Would I want more people to be aware of the challenges that I faced? Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's one of the reasons for doing this talk, because it's important that people understand that, you know, this is what's happening, and you know, let's kind of be kind and supportive to other people. I am up for asking questions, I think. If there are any questions, that's great. I'm better with questions, I think, as they're structured. I hope that you've enjoyed what I've had to say today. I hope it's helped a little bit. And all I can say is thank you for listening.